The town of Copper Ridge had seen its share of hangings, but the execution scheduled for high noon on this scorching August day in 1883 promised to be the most controversial yet. Word had spread throughout the Arizona Territory that they were finally going to hang the notorious Black Widow of the Desert, a woman accused of poisoning 3 husbands and stealing enough gold to buy half of Tucson. Windwalker sat motionless on his war horse atop the mesa overlooking the settlement, watching the crowd gather around the hastily constructed gallows in the town square. At 28, he was one of the most respected scouts in Geronimo's band, known for his ability to move unseen through enemy territory and his uncanny skill at reading the truth behind white men's lies. But today, something about the scene below troubled him in ways he couldn't quite explain. The woman standing on the gallows platform didn't look like a cold-blooded killer. Even from a distance, Windwalker could see that her posture was too straight, her movements too controlled for someone facing imminent death. She stood with her hands bound behind her back, her auburn hair gleaming in the desert sun, and her chin raised in defiance rather than bowed in defeat. Most puzzling of all was her complete lack of fear. Windwalker had seen many people face death, in battle, during raids, at previous executions, and he knew the smell of terror, the way it changed a person's breathing and posture. This woman showed none of those signs. She was either the most cold-blooded killer in territorial history or something else entirely. But the most shocking revelation was about to unfold before the entire town. As the executioner placed the noose around the woman's neck and the crowd pressed closer to witness frontier justice, Windwalker noticed movement in the surrounding buildings that made his warrior's instincts scream warnings. Men positioned on rooftops with rifles, others stationed near windows and doorways. The positioning was too strategic, too coordinated to be random. This wasn't just an execution. It was a trap. Windwalker's sharp eyes counted at least a dozen men in positions that would allow them to control the crowd if violence erupted. But who were they? Local law enforcement didn't have that many men, and their positioning spoke of military training rather than small-town deputy experience. His question was answered when the woman on the gallows suddenly raised her voice to address the crowd, her words carrying clearly across the desert air. "People of Copper Ridge," she called out, her tone strong and authoritative rather than pleading. "Before I die, you deserve to know the truth about what's been happening in your town." The executioner moved to place the hood over her head, but she continued speaking rapidly. "My name is not Sarah Blackwood, as you've been told. I am Agent Catherine Morrison of the Pinkerton Detective Agency, and I've spent the past 8 months investigating a conspiracy that reaches into the highest levels of your territorial government." The crowd erupted in confused murmurs and angry shouts, but the woman pressed on. "The 3 men I'm accused of poisoning were not my husbands. They were corrupt officials involved in stealing federal funds meant for Apache reservations. I was gathering evidence of their crimes when a gunshot cracked across the square, and the woman jerked as a bullet creased her shoulder. But instead of crying out in pain, she used the confusion to somehow slip her bonds and dive off the platform into the crowd below. And that's when all hell broke loose. The carefully positioned men Windwalker had spotted revealed themselves as federal marshals, emerging from their hiding places with weapons drawn as they moved to protect the fallen agent. But they were vastly outnumbered by townspeople who had been whipped into a lynch mob frenzy by weeks of propaganda about the Black Widow. In the chaos that followed, with bullets flying and people screaming, Windwalker found himself making a split-second decision that would change multiple lives forever. Without fully understanding why, he spurred his horse down the slope toward town, riding directly into the heart of a battle that had nothing to do with Apache concerns. He found Agent Morrison crouched behind an overturned wagon, clutching her wounded shoulder while bullets whined overhead. Her green eyes widened as the Apache warrior materialized beside her like something from a fever dream. "You're either here to collect a bounty or you're the most unlikely rescue I've ever seen," she gasped, trying to stanch the bleeding with a torn piece of her dress. "Neither," Windwalker replied, helping her to a more secure position. I'm here because innocent people don't deserve to die for other men's crimes. But you haven't seen the biggest surprise yet. As Windwalker and Agent Morrison took shelter in an abandoned blacksmith shop while the gun battle raged outside, she began to explain the real story behind her presence in Copper Ridge, a tale of corruption, murder, and conspiracy that reached far beyond one small frontier town. The Pinkerton agency sent me here to investigate reports of missing federal funds, she said, wincing as Windwalker used strips from his shirt to properly bandage her wound. Money that was supposed to be used for supplies and medical care on Apache reservations was being diverted into private accounts. Windwalker's hands stilled on the bandage. Apache reservation funds? Catherine nodded grimly. Hundreds of thousands of dollars over the past 3 years. Money that should have prevented the starvation and disease that drove so many bands off the reservations and back to raiding. Your people have been suffering and dying because corrupt officials have been stealing their lifeline. The implications hit Windwalker like a physical blow. The recent uptick in Apache raids, the desperation that had driven normally peaceful bands to violence, the children dying of diseases that proper medical supplies could have prevented, all of it could be traced back to white men stealing money meant to help his people. The 3 men I'm accused of killing discovered my true identity, Catherine continued. They tried to force me to abandon the investigation in exchange for my life. When I refused, they framed me for their murders and arranged this public execution to silence me permanently. Windwalker studied her face in the dim light filtering through the shop's broken windows. Why should I believe you? White people have lied to my people for generations. Catherine reached into a hidden pocket of her dress and withdrew a small leather portfolio, its pages filled with coded notes and official documents. Because I have proof. Names, dates, bank records, correspondence, everything needed to expose the entire conspiracy and recover the stolen funds. As Windwalker examined the documents, his respect for this woman grew. The evidence was meticulously organized and damning in its thoroughness. Agent Catherine Morrison wasn't just an undercover operative. She was a skilled investigator who had risked her life to uncover crimes that affected thousands of people. Wait, don't miss this crucial detail. As the gunfire outside began to subside and voices could be heard organizing search parties, Catherine revealed something that changed Windwalker's entire understanding of why she'd been willing to risk everything for this investigation. There's something else you should know, she said quietly, her green eyes reflecting pain that went deeper than her physical wound. My younger brother was stationed at Fort Apache as a supply officer 3 years ago. He discovered the first evidence of the fund diversions and tried to report it through proper channels. Windwalker saw where this was leading. He was silenced. They made it look like a riding accident. Catherine's voice carried the weight of old grief and burning rage. But I knew Marcus. He was the finest horseman in his regiment. He didn't just fall off his mount and break his neck. He was murdered because he tried to do the right thing. The personal motivation behind her dangerous mission became clear. This wasn't just about justice or duty. It was about avenging her brother and preventing other families from suffering the same loss. So I requested this assignment, Catherine continued. I spent 2 years learning how to be someone else, how to get close to these men, how to gather evidence that would stand up in federal court. I knew it might cost me my life, but I couldn't let Marcus die for nothing. Outside, the sound of approaching footsteps and barked orders indicated that the corrupt local officials were organizing a systematic search of the town. Windwalker knew they had minutes at most before being discovered. "Can you ride?" he asked Catherine. She tested her shoulder and nodded grimly. "I can do whatever's necessary to get this evidence to the federal prosecutor in Santa Fe. What you're seeing now is nothing compared to what happens next." Windwalker's escape plan was audacious in its simplicity and brilliant in its execution. Using his intimate knowledge of Apache tactics and the surrounding terrain, he led Catherine through a series of abandoned mine shafts and forgotten canyons that allowed them to evade the search parties entirely. But their journey to Santa Fe would take them through the heart of Apache territory at a time when tensions between natives and whites had never been higher. For Catherine, traveling with an Apache warrior meant protection from natural dangers and pursuit by corrupt officials. For Windwalker, traveling with a white woman meant constant risk of being shot on sight by any cavalry patrol they encountered. During their 3-day trek through some of the most unforgiving landscape in the Southwest, an unusual partnership began to develop between the Pinkerton agent and the Apache scout. Catherine's analytical mind and attention to detail complemented Windwalker's survival instincts and knowledge of the land. More importantly, they began to understand each other as individuals rather than representatives of enemy peoples. Catherine told Windwalker about her childhood in Chicago, her education at a women's college that had prepared her for a life of genteel domesticity, and her decision to join the Pinkerton agency after her brother's death. She spoke of feeling like an outsider in white society because of her unconventional career choices and her refusal to accept that justice was only available to those with power and money. Windwalker shared stories of his own people, not the savage raiders of white nightmares, but families struggling to maintain their traditions and dignity in the face of an expanding civilization that seemed determined to erase them entirely. He spoke of children who had never known peace, of elders who remembered better times, of warriors who fought not from hatred, but from the desperate need to protect what little remained of their world. "Your brother died trying to help my people," Windwalker said on their second night, as they shared a small fire hidden deep in a box canyon. "That means something. It means he saw us as human beings worthy of justice." Catherine looked across the flames at this man who had risked everything to save a stranger. "And you saved me, even though my people have brought nothing but war and suffering to yours. What does that make us?" "Allies," Windwalker replied simply. "Two people who believe justice matters more than the color of our skin or the circumstances of our birth." And that's when the most incredible transformation began. Their arrival in Santa Fe created a sensation that reached all the way to Washington. Catherine's evidence was even more damning than federal prosecutors had hoped, leading to indictments against dozens of officials throughout the territorial government. The recovery of stolen funds allowed for immediate improvements in reservation conditions, probably saving hundreds of Apache lives. But the most significant change was in the relationship between Catherine Morrison and Windwalker, which had evolved from desperate alliance to deep mutual respect, to something that neither had expected when they first met in that chaotic town square. Catherine could have returned to Chicago, to a comfortable life with the Pinkerton agency, and the gratitude of a nation impressed by her courage and skill. Instead, she chose to stay in the Southwest, using her investigative abilities to document the real conditions on Apache reservations and advocate for policy changes that would address the root causes of conflict. Windwalker could have returned to his war band, to a life of constant conflict and gradually diminishing hope. Instead, he became something unprecedented, an official liaison between the Apache people and the federal government, using his understanding of both cultures to negotiate agreements that actually had a chance of being honored. Together, they created something new in the American West, a partnership based on mutual respect, shared goals, and the radical belief that justice should be colorblind. They traveled throughout Apache territory, investigating complaints, mediating disputes, and proving that cooperation between former enemies was not only possible, but more effective than endless warfare. The professional partnership gradually became personal as Catherine and Windwalker discovered that their initial attraction had deepened into love, not the desperate passion of two people thrown together by circumstances, but the steady, enduring affection of two souls who had found their perfect complement. "I never expected to fall in love with someone from your world," Catherine said one evening, as they sat together on the porch of the small house they'd built at the edge of Apache territory. "I never expected to fall in love with someone from any world," Windwalker replied, his arm around her shoulders as they watched the sun set over land that had finally found peace. "But I've learned that love doesn't follow the boundaries men draw on maps. It follows the boundaries of the heart." The woman who was nearly executed as a criminal became a champion of justice, and the warrior who had spent his life fighting became an architect of peace. Together, they proved that sometimes the most unlikely partnerships can create the most extraordinary results. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that justice is worth fighting for regardless of the personal cost, then you've found your home. Subscribe to Wild West Romance Stories for more tales of courage, transformation, and love that emerges from the most unexpected alliances. From frontier conspiracies to territorial justice, every story we tell proves that the strongest bonds are forged not in comfort, but in the shared struggle for truth and righteousness. This is where two worlds collide and discover that love grows strongest when it's rooted in mutual respect and common cause.